The storm raged across the night sky as King Edward stood in the war tent, his hands trembling over the prisoner's fate. The soldiers outside banged their spears against the mud, demanding blood. The narrator spoke of his torment, for Edward had seen too many executions, yet tonight his heart was pierced by an unshakable vision. The enemy's daughter, Isabella, had appeared earlier on the battlefield, her eyes defiant and unbroken. King Edward said, "If I order his death, I chain myself to endless vengeance." His general Lord William said, "Mercy weakens a king." But Edward's voice quivered, and cruelty destroys a soul. The torchlight flickered, throwing jagged shadows on the canvas walls, as the prisoner knelt silently, his head bowed but his breath steady. Edward's chest rose and fell with anguish as the cries outside grew louder. The narrator revealed Edward's inner wound, a longing not for power, but for something unseen, something forbidden. He whispered into the air, "Fate places a dagger in my hand, yet my heart refuses to drive it home." The narrator revealed how dawn broke over the camp, its cold light spreading across blood-soaked soil. Edward emerged from the tent, his face pale with decision. Isabella's eyes followed him, though chained by guards. Edward said, "Let him live, though his life may haunt me." Lord William muttered bitterly, "Mercy will shatter your throne." Yet Edward walked past him, cloak heavy with rain. The soldiers murmured in confusion, their chants silenced. Isabella's lips parted, as if in gratitude, though her chains rattled like thunder. The narrator told of whispers crawling through the castle halls, tongues sharp as blades. Courtiers spoke of Edward's weakness, while William fanned the fire of dissent. Edward said, "Compassion is not weakness," though his voice carried more to himself than to others. Rumors of Isabella's presence spread like wildfire. The narrator described Edward's silent vigil at night, his hands gripping the stone window ledge, eyes searching the dark horizon. Isabella haunted his thoughts, her defiance piercing him deeper than any blade. Edward whispered, "Why does her gaze unmake me?" The storm had passed, but inside his chest, thunder remained. The narrator revealed their first secret meeting, hidden beneath the castle's crumbling chapel ruins. Isabella's chains were removed for a moment, her eyes locked with Edward's. Isabella said, "You saved me, but why?" Edward answered, "Because your life weighs more than victory." Their breaths mingled in silence, shadows whispering of betrayal should they be discovered. The council chamber shook with angry voices, the long oak table covered in maps of conquest. King Edward sat at its head, pale yet resolute, his fingers pressed hard against the carved wood. Lord William thundered, "The enemy gathers strength across the river. We must strike first." Edward's voice was steady but cold. "War spills blood, not honor." The courtiers shifted uneasily, whispering behind sleeves. The narrator spoke of rising pressure, how Edward's defiance of war created cracks within his own court. Eyes darted toward Isabella, kept in guarded silence in a corner, her beauty now weaponized as suspicion. Edward's chest rose with quiet defiance, yet doubt gnawed at his heart. He asked himself if a king could serve both kingdom and love. The chamber's air was heavy with smoke and fear, as though history itself leaned forward to listen. The narrator revealed the schemes of Lord William, whose eyes glimmered like steel as he left the chamber. He pulled aside a young scribe, whispering venomous words. Lord William said, "Let the people believe Edward weak. Whisper that he spares our enemies for her smile." The scribe's hand shook as he nodded, carrying poison disguised as rumor. The halls of the castle filled with murmurs, their echoes louder than drums. Edward's authority began to erode, one shadowed word at a time, while William smiled behind a mask of loyalty. On the ramparts at dusk, Edward gazed toward the horizon, where enemy banners rippled crimson. Isabella was led briefly into the courtyard, her eyes lifting to meet his across distance. Edward whispered, "Even chained, she stands freer than I." The narrator told of how that single glance carried more fire than the torches lining the walls. Isabella's gaze pierced his armor, leaving him trembling. Lord William, watching from shadows, muttered darkly, "A king undone by a woman's stare." The tension of their forbidden bond grew stronger under the dying sun. The narrator described the midnight delivery of a letter slipped through narrow bars of a guarded chamber. Isabella unfolded the parchment, her breath catching as she read Edward's words. Edward's writing spoke of torment. I am trapped between crown and soul, but your eyes reveal a kingdom worth more than stone walls. Tears shimmered in Isabella's eyes, though she whispered, such hope will destroy us both. Chains rattled as she clutched the letter to her chest, the candle guttering beside her, as if even flame feared to betray their secret. The narrator spoke of the betrayer within, a trusted knight named Sir Geoffrey, whose loyalty had long been doubted. He approached Edward, kneeling in the throne room, eyes downcast. Sir Geoffrey said, I live to serve my king. Yet his heart carried another truth, for William's gold already weighed in his purse. Edward, unaware, placed trust where none belonged. In shadows, Isabella watched silently, her chest tight with dread. She whispered to herself, trust is the sharpest blade, and it waits at his back. The narrator spoke of shadows gathering in the abandoned chapel, where Edward risked everything to meet Isabella. The ruined altar stood cracked, moonlight spilling across the broken floor. Edward whispered, every step toward you breaks the crown I wear. Isabella replied, and yet you walk toward me still. Their hands brushed lightly, a forbidden contact that set fire to the silence. Chains were absent tonight, but guards were never far. Edward's chest ached with the weight of both kingdoms as he gazed into her eyes. Isabella's defiance softened, replaced by fragile hope. The night air crept cold into the stone walls, yet their breath was warm, mingling in stolen closeness. Edward said, if history curses me, let it be for loving you. The narrator described how lanterns swung in the wind, casting golden light on Edward and Isabella as they lingered in silence. Their closeness carried the weight of treason. Edward whispered, they see me as a king, but in your eyes, I am only a man. Isabella lowered her gaze, whispering, and in mine, that is enough. The air trembled with longing. The storm outside grew louder, rattling through the ruins. Edward took her hand at last, the forbidden touch anchoring them against the fury of war. The narrator revealed how young messenger Thomas stumbled upon the meeting, his wide eyes freezing at the sight of king and prisoner entwined in forbidden closeness. Thomas whispered to himself, if the court learns of this, his crown will crumble. Yet he trembled, torn between duty and the shock of love unveiled. Edward and Isabella did not notice him at first, their whispers louder than the boy's gasps. Edward said softly, let the world rage, so long as you stand with me. The narrator told of whispers flooding the market square as dawn broke. Merchants abandoned their stalls to murmur of the king's scandal. The scent of bread and iron mingled with fear. A woman said, they say Edward spares her for love, not mercy. A man replied, a king undone by his heart cannot hold a throne. The rumors spread faster than smoke. The weight of secret meetings became public suspicion, their bond now a weapon in the mouths of the people. The narrator described the shadow figure watching from the cliff above the castle, cloaked in darkness. His presence was silent, yet his eyes saw everything. The shadow figure murmured, love makes kings weak, yet weakness may bend history itself. His true loyalty remained veiled, his movements like whispers of smoke. Below him, Edward and Isabella walked briefly in the courtyard under watchful guards, unaware of the gaze that studied their every motion with hidden intent. The narrator described the thunder of boots echoing across the valley as banners of war unfurled. Drums pounded like a heartbeat, summoning men to arms. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and storm. King Edward rode at the front, cloak whipping in the wind, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He said, these are not steps toward glory, but toward graves. Lord William shouted beside him, glory is all that matters. The soldiers roared, shields striking in rhythm, though many trembled under armor. Isabella, from her tower window, watched in silence, her fingers pressed to the glass, whispering words lost in wind. The narrator told of Edward pacing alone in the great hall, his mind restless with betrayal. The flames in the hearth sputtered, smoke curling into shadows. He whispered, "How can I hold a crown when love pulls me away from the throne?" Sir Geoffrey approached quietly, kneeling with false humility. "Your men grow restless, my king," he said, though his eyes carried treachery. Edward sighed. "Restless men can be led, but restless hearts are chains." From the dark corner, Isabella's gaze pierced the silence, though her lips remained sealed. The narrator described Edward stealing into the ruined chapel once more, where Isabella waited under God's neglect. Her voice trembled. "Why risk this? Your throne bleeds for every step you take here." Edward answered, "Because without you, the throne is only stone and sorrow." Their hands touched, fragile yet fierce, as though the world conspired to crush them but failed. Isabella whispered, "If they find us, both kingdoms will burn." Edward's eyes burned brighter than the torches. "Let them burn, if only once I feel alive." The narrator revealed Lord William in the council chamber, fanning flames of war before the courtiers. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "Edward spares the enemy's daughter, and in doing so condemns us all." Gasps filled the room as whispers spread like wildfire. A courtier asked, "Is it true?" William sneered, "Ask yourself why she still breathes." The seeds of rebellion were planted, watered by ambition. The castle itself seemed to tremble with the weight of schemes. The narrator told of the shadow figure moving silently through underground passages beneath the castle. His dagger glinted faintly, his eyes hidden by his hood. He muttered, "Kings fall not by armies but by whispers." Above, Edward prayed in solitude, unaware of the hidden watcher. Isabella sat nearby in quiet chains, her gaze softening as if sensing unseen danger. The storm above shook the stones, as if history prepared to break. The narrator revealed the moment the secret unraveled. In the great hall, Edward's letter to Isabella was seized by a guard and thrown before the court. Gasps filled the chamber, the air snapping with betrayal. Lord William shouted, "Here lies proof that our king betrays crown and country for the enemy's daughter." Edward's fists clenched as his voice thundered, "I betray nothing but war's cruelty." Isabella stood chained at the hall's edge, her eyes burning with both fear and love. The courtiers muttered in a frenzy, torn between loyalty and rebellion. History had turned its face against the king. The narrator spoke of Sir Geoffrey's treachery unveiled. He approached Edward in mock loyalty, but William's words unmasked him. William sneered, "Even your knight bows to gold, not crown." Edward's voice broke with anger. "Geoffrey, I trusted you with my life." Sir Geoffrey lowered his eyes, murmuring, "Gold buys survival when loyalty buys only a grave." The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Isabella turned away, whispering, "A heart betrayed once is never whole again." The narrator described Thomas, the innocent messenger, clutching his chest as flames consumed the marketplace. William's men had set fires to spread fear, and Thomas stumbled through smoke searching for safety. He cried out, "Why must the innocent suffer for crowns and chains?" The chaos revealed the cost of secrets laid bare. Screams echoed as villagers fled, while the bells tolled above like a funeral hymn. In the distance, Edward heard the tolling, his heart breaking as war seeped into every street. The narrator revealed Edward's torment as he stood before the chapel altar alone, crown heavy in his hand. His voice cracked, "A king cannot love without dooming his throne." Isabella, brought before him in chains, whispered, "And yet you already chose when you spared me." Edward dropped to one knee before her, whispering, "If love damns me, let it be my salvation." The silence of the chapel held them, their bond stronger than the stone walls that caged them. The narrator described Isabella's capture by William's men, "One and small." Under storm clouds she was dragged through the courtyard, her chains rattling as she cried. Edward fought through soldiers, his sword cutting a path, but William stepped forward with steel raised, shouting, "You will lose crown, kingdom, and her." Edward's roar split the storm. "Not while breath remains in me." The clash of steel and thunder merged into one, the forbidden love now caught in the jaws of fate. The narrator revealed the breaking of dawn when banners rose like fire against grey skies. Edward sat atop his black horse, his armor dented but gleaming, his red cloak whipping with the wind. His voice rang clear, "We ride not for conquest but for survival, for those who cannot defend themselves." Soldiers roared in answer, their shields pounding in rhythm, though fear trembled in their eyes. Lord William spurred his horse beside him, sneering, "Words do not win battles, Edward. Strength and blood do." Edward's gaze did not waver. Strength without mercy is no strength at all. The armies lined across the valley, banners flapping like wings of vultures, the smell of wet iron heavy in the air. In the tower behind, Isabella pressed her forehead against the cold stone, her chains clinking softly. She whispered prayers drowned by the sound of war drums. Aye. Lightning flickered far off, signaling storm and fate together. Edward raised his sword high, a glint of defiance in his eyes. The narrator spoke of a king who rode with sorrow in his heart, but unshaken resolve carved into his every word, every breath, every step toward destiny. The narrator described how the heavens opened as steel met steel. Rain poured like arrows from the sky, mud swallowing men whole as they fell screaming. The clang of swords was deafening, sparks flying in the chaos. Edward roared above the storm, "Hold the line. For every step back, we lose a life we swore to protect." His blade carved through enemy ranks, his eyes aflame with purpose. William charged ahead, laughter booming like thunder. "Mercy dies here, Edward. Only the strong survive." Lightning cracked above, illuminating the slaughter. Arrows whistled like death's chorus, piercing shields, flesh and earth. Horses screamed as mud splashed red beneath hooves. Soldiers clashed blindly, every man's breath a prayer against the storm. The narrator's words weighed heavy. The land itself seemed to mourn, bleeding through rain and soil. Isabella's cries echoed faintly from her tower, lost beneath the storm's fury. Edward's heart surged with anguish as he swung again, determined to defy fate, though the world seemed already swallowed by blood and thunder. The narrator told of the mist that thickened across the field, swallowing men into shadows. From the fog emerged the shadow figure, dagger gleaming, his hood drawn low. His voice rang out like judgment. "It was not love that betrayed you, Edward. It was William's thirst for power." Edward froze, his sword lowering, the storm pausing around him. William shouted across the clash, "Do not heed liars who hide in shadows." But Edward's mind reeled, the truth slicing sharper than steel. Soldiers faltered, their blades hesitating, as whispers of betrayal spread like fire. Lightning flashed again, casting the shadow figure's outline stark against the fog. His words struck like prophecy, "Ambition, not mercy, poisons your kingdom." Edward's chest heaved, his breath ragged, as he looked upon William with eyes of fury and sorrow. The battle stalled, thunder rolling like drums of revelation. The narrator revealed how history bent at this instant, when one voice in shadows split the battlefield into doubt, and truth became sharper than any blade. The narrator described the moment when loyalty shattered in sparks of steel. Edward turned to William, rage and grief burning in his eyes. His voice cut through rain, "Your hunger for power has destroyed us more than any enemy blade." William snarled, "Love weakens kings, only fear rules men." Their swords collided, sparks bursting as if stars were torn from the sky. Soldiers backed away, circling as the duel raged, their faces pale in the stormlight. Each strike was not only a clash of steel but of ideals, mercy against cruelty, justice against greed. Mud splashed red beneath their boots as lightning cracked above, illuminating every strike like fire across the heavens. Edward's arms shook with both pain and fury, his wound bleeding, yet his heart refused to yield. William's blade cut close, his laughter filled with venom. "When you fall, none will remember your mercy, only my victory." Edward growled through clenched teeth. "History remembers sacrifice, not fear." The storm howled as if the sky itself bore witness to their fury, the duel of love and ambition forging the kingdom's fate in steel. The narrator spoke of Isabella, breaking her chains and fleeing her guards. Storm battered her torn gown as she stumbled into the courtyard, her voice rising above thunder. "Edward!" He turned mid-duel, his eyes meeting hers, blood streaming from his wound, love and rage entwined. William snarled, "She is the weapon that will end you." Edward roared back, "She is the reason I still breathe." Lightning crashed, illuminating the battlefield as chaos erupted around them. Isabella ran through mud, chains dragging like echoes of her prison, reaching for Edward. Those soldiers clashed around her. Edward surged forward with his last strength, his sword carving a path, but William's blade blocked him again, sparks raining like fire. The narrator revealed how the storm mirrored their hearts, wild, untamed, and relentless. The clash of love and ambition reached its peak, and fate stood ready to decide. Isabella's tears mixed with rain, her cry slicing through storm and steel. Edward's defiance roared louder than thunder, his spirit unyielding though his body bled. Love had turned into war's sharpest weapon, and the storm became history's witness. The narrator spoke of the storm's fury as the courtyard became the final stage of destiny. Edward's cloak was drenched and torn, his breath ragged, but his eyes still burned with defiance. Isabella cried his name as chains rattled from her wrists, her voice slicing through thunder. Edward raised his sword against William's charge, the steel clashing with sparks that lit the rain-soaked night. William bellowed, "You gave your kingdom to ruin for her." Edward roared back, "I gave them mercy when you gave them death." Their blades met in brutal rhythm, each strike a lifetime of betrayal. The soldiers circled in silence, no chants, no war cries, only the storm echoing judgment. William's sword pierced Edward's side, blood mingling with rain, yet Edward held his ground, pressing forward to shield Isabella from the killing blow. Isabella screamed, "Do not leave me." Edward's voice trembled but steady, "If love damns me, let it be my redemption." He staggered but forced his body between her and the steel, his sacrifice written across the storm, his love stronger than fear, stronger than crown, stronger than death. The narrator revealed how betrayal now faced its reckoning. Sir Geoffrey, once trusted knight, knelt in mud, his wrists bound in chains, armor tarnished. His face was pale as the storm thundered above. Edward leaned heavily against a pillar, his wound bleeding freely, his voice broken but firm. "You carried my trust like a shield, and you sold it for gold." Geoffrey lowered his head, shame carving lines into his face. He whispered, "Fear guided my hand, not hatred. I saw only graves in loyalty, but gold promised survival." Lord William sneered from a distance, "Excuses are fit for cowards, not knights." Edward lifted his trembling hand, signaling judgment. Isabella clung to his arm, her eyes burning with sorrow, whispering, "Spare him, and they will call you weak. Condemn him, and they will call you cruel." The silence pressed heavy, as soldiers waited for the king's verdict. Geoffrey closed his eyes, voice faint, "May the gods forgive me, for men will not." The decision was inevitable, for betrayal, once revealed, poisons every bond. Edward's hand did not waver. Justice would claim Geoffrey beneath storm-lit skies. The narrator described how the storm passed, leaving silence that screamed louder than battle. The battlefield was littered with torn banners, broken shields, and bodies lying motionless in the mud. The air reeked of blood and smoke. Soldiers wept as they lifted their wounded king, carrying him carefully across the courtyard. Edward's crown hung loose from his side, its gold dulled by blood. Isabella walked beside him, no longer chained, her broken shackles dragging across stone. Her eyes were fixed only on Edward's fading strength. She whispered, "You gave them mercy, even when they called it weakness. You gave them love, even when they called it treason." Edward's lips barely moved, but his words carried the weight of truth. A crown without love is only iron, cold, and empty. Soldiers bowed their heads, not to the crown but to the man who carried it with sacrifice. Bells tolled across the kingdom, their somber tones echoing grief and honor. Dawn broke through the clouds, light spilling across the courtyard like a final blessing. Edward's body trembled under weight of loss, but his hand still gripped Isabella's, their bond unbroken even as the world wept around them. The narrator told of Edward's final moments in the dim chamber, where shadows trembled with candlelight. His body lay weak, breath shallow, his hand pressing a blood-stained letter into Isabella's grasp. His voice was faint yet steady. "This is all I leave to you." Isabella unfolded the parchment, her tears dripping onto crimson-stained ink. She read aloud, "Love is not treason. It is the only truth worth dying for." Her voice cracked, but she clung to the words as if they could bind his spirit to the earth. Edward's eyes softened, his lips trembling. "When they bury me, let them bury the king. But let the man who loved you live in your heart." His hand slipped from hers, limp, and silence fell heavy across the chamber. The soldiers at the door lowered their heads in grief, unwilling to watch their sovereign's final breath. Isabella pressed the letter to her chest, whispering through her tears, "You will not be forgotten." The flicker of the torches dimmed as if the room itself mourned. Edward's last gift was not the crown, but the proof that love had carved itself into history's memory. The narrator revealed the final image that remained etched into history. Isabella walked slowly through the mist of the graveyard at dawn, her silk gown torn, her chains broken but still clinking faintly against stone. She knelt at Edward's fresh grave, her hands trembling as she placed the blood-stained letter upon the stone cross. Her voice was no louder than a whisper, "You will not be forgotten." Soldiers knelt in silence behind her, their armor battered, their heads bowed not to the grave of a king, but to the memory of a man who gave everything for love. Bells tolled in the distance, slow and mournful, while smoke rose faintly from the battlefield ruins beyond. The kingdom's banners lay folded, no longer raised for war, but draped in mourning. Isabella stood, her eyes wet with grief but burning with strength. She turned from the grave, stepping into the morning mist, her figure fading like memory, but her presence eternal. The narrator's final words lingered. Love had not saved a kingdom, but it had rewritten the heart of history. And though silence swallowed the graveyard, Edward's sacrifice lived on in every breath Isabella took.